Part 77. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 762. King Duan chased King Huai like a mad dog and bit him hard. King Huai must have had a big head recently. But this had nothing to do with Tang Ning. After all, Duan Wang didn't bite him. If Duan Wang really had an idea for him, he wouldn't mind knocking out all the teeth in his mouth. In addition to the affairs of Shangsha province, he is also busy with other things these days. The caravan going to the grassland had to be organized as soon as possible. The Tang family had fallen from being a high-ranking wealthy family to this. Tang Ning had ravaged them in all aspects, both materially and spiritually, and the hatred in her heart was gone. It's time for him to plan his own way out. After all, he can't stay in the Chen kingdom to help Emperor Chen work. Lanlan is still waiting for him in the Chu kingdom, and Weinianyan is still waiting for him to go to the grassland to fulfill the agreement. He is pacifying the south of the Yangtze River and the northwest, so he is helping Emperor Chen do the work. After so many things, kidnapping one of his daughters is not too much, right? It had been quite a while since he came back from the grassland, and it was early October in a blink of an eye. One night in mid-October, before the curfew, a carriage slowly stopped in front of Tang's house. Tang Shui helped Tang Yu get out of the carriage, breathed a long sigh of relief, and said, "I'm finally back." Tang Ning had already planned to go to bed. When she heard that they were returning to Beijing, she put on her clothes again, walked out, looked at the two figures in the hall, and said with a smile, "Mom, you are back." Tang Yu came over, looked at him, and said distressedly, "Why are you thinner than before? You must have suffered a lot on the grassland, right?" "No," Tang Ning smiled and changed the subject. "Are you hungry? Do you want me to make some midnight snacks?" "No need." Tang Shui shook his head and said, "There will be a curfew soon. It's getting late. I'll go home first." "Well." Tang Ning looked at her and said awkwardly, "It's too late now, why don't we just rest here tonight?" Tang Shui shook his head and said, "There are many people during the day, but it is more convenient at night." After she finished speaking, she turned around and walked outside. Tang Ning stretched out her hand to stop her. "Wait a minute." Tang Shui turned around and asked, "Is there anything else?" "You don't have to go back." Tang Ning looked at her and said, "The Tang family is gone." Tang Shui frowned at him and asked, "What?" Tang Ning explained, "During the days when you left Beijing, a small accident happened to the Tang family. Tang Qi and Tang Huai were dismissed from their posts, but your father was not affected at all. In addition, the Tang family's old residence was also raided by the imperial court, so you can't go back tonight." Tang Shui looked at him directly. "Little accident?" Tang Ning thought for a while and added, "It's a little bit bigger than a small accident. It's considered a medium accident." Whether it was a small accident or a moderate accident, the Tang family's old residence now belonged to the court and not to the Tang family, so Tang Shui naturally could not go back. Sooner or later, they would know what happened to the Tang family, so it would be better for Tang Ning to tell them herself. In the room, Tang Yu looked at him and said, "Just do what you think you should do, don't worry about us." Tang Ning nodded and said, "You guys should rest early, I'm going back." Tang Ning walked out of the room and walked to the courtyard. Tang Shui walked out of the room and said, "Sooner or later, the Tang family will rise again. How will you gain a foothold in the capital by then?" Tang Ning turned around, smiled, and asked, "Who said I want to establish myself in the capital?" Tang Shui was stunned and asked, You want to leave the capital?" Tang Ning did not answer the question and continued, "Why do you think the Tang family will rise again? Wait until King Duan. Will that position definitely belong to King Duan?" Tang Shui was stunned and looked at him for a long time before saying, You mean? Women should not have to worry about men's affairs." Tang Ning smiled and said, "Go back and rest early. Watching Tang Ning walk out of the yard, Tang Shui stood there, stunned for a while, then gritted his teeth and said, "You actually talked to your cousin like that?" Capital West District. Just after dawn, there was a knock on the door of a house facing the street. Tang Jing opened the door and saw the figure standing outside, and said in surprise, "Shui-er, when did you come back?" Last night. Tang Shui walked into the house and asked, "Where is my mother?" A woman walked out of the room, saw her, and said in surprise, "Shui-er is back, how is it? Is Jiangnan fun?" Tang Shui nodded and said, "It's okay." Tang Jing stepped forward and asked doubtfully, "How did you know we moved here?" Tang Shui said, "I originally went home, but when I saw that my home was sealed off, I asked someone to inquire and found out that you had moved here." "What happened?" The woman sighed and said, "A lot of things happened in Beijing during your absence." Tang Shui had already heard Tang Ning talk about what happened in the Tang family last night, but he couldn't tell her where she spent the night last night. After listening to what the woman said, she was silent for a while and then said, "This is all. It was my uncle's fault, no one else is to blame. Let's not talk about this anymore." Tang Jing waved his hand and said, "The old house is gone, where will you stay tonight?" Tang Shui looked at the courtyard and said, "Of course I live at home." Tang Jing looked slightly embarrassed and said, "As you can see, this house is not big. It has only one bedroom and no place for you to live." Tang Shui was stunned and asked, "Didn't you think of me when you bought the house?" Tang Jing said embarrassedly, "When you were not here, we forgot, besides, we didn't have enough money to buy a bigger house." Tang Shui knew that his parents never took money from the Tang family, and only relied on his annual salary, but even so, he was still angry in his heart. He looked at them with shame and said, "You disappoint me so much." In Anyang Princess's mansion, Anyang Princess looked at her, laughing so hard that she couldn't close her mouth, panting and said, So you bought the house next to them yourself." She put her hand on Tang Shui's shoulder and smiled, "You will forget such things. Are you their biological child?" "Oh, yes, you are not their biological child. The two have been good friends since childhood, and they can talk about everything. It's harmless to make some jokes like this on weekdays." "Stop laughing." Tang Shui pulled her face and said, "Who knew that we just went to Jiangnan, and such a thing happened in Beijing?" Princess Anyang's smile faded, and she said, "Speaking of this, your cousin is too cruel, that's his uncle." Tang Shui looked at her dissatisfiedly and said, "Is there an uncle who wants to take his nephew's life again and again?" Princess Anyang looked at him and said in surprise, "Have you forgotten that you are a member of the Tang family? He has made your Tang family like this, and you actually stand on his side." Tang Shui glanced at her and said, "I stand on the side of reason." Princess Anyang looked at her, shook her head, and said, "You don't know how cruel his methods are. The Tang family moved to after the West District, he actually bought a whole street of shops in the West District, and hung their Tang Grenzai signs on all of them. I heard that after the Tang family moved there, the door has never been opened." A mischievous expression appeared on her face, and she said, "But he is still not cruel enough. If it were me, I would buy the Tang family's old house and use it to raise pigs, and I would be so angry that they would die." Tang Shui glanced at her and said, "Don't you think he is cruel?" Princess Anyang curled her lips and said, "A real man should repay grievances and revenges, and this is what a gentleman does." Tang Shui asked, "So you think he is a gentleman?" "Puh," Princess Anyang spat secretly and said, "He is a pervert." Ministry of Revenue. The Ministry of Revenue is in charge of the national finances. The finances here include not only the silver in the treasury, but also any physical property belonging to the country. Lord Tang wants to buy the Tang family's old house. Minister of Revenue Jianchuo looked at Tang Ning and said in surprise, "Don't you have a mansion in Beijing? What do you want the Tang family's old house for?" Tang Ning looked at him and said calmly, "Raising pigs. Fortunate young gentleman." Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 763. Gardens or mansions belonging to the treasury can be bought and sold by the household department unless otherwise specified above. After all, if these things are idle, they are just idle. It is better to exchange them for silver and use them to do more things. There are no special instructions on the Tang family's house, which means that the household department can handle it. Since Mr. Tang wants it, I will sell it to you at the lowest price. Qianchuo, the Minister of Household Affairs, thought for a moment, looked at him and asked, "What do Mr. Tang think of 50,000 taels?" The old residence of the Tang family cannot be called a house, but a mansion. For such a mansion, there are people willing to buy it for 100,000 taels. Qianchuo did this very well. Tang Ning nodded and said, "That's it." The Ministry of Revenue collected the banknote and handed the deed of the Tang family's old house to Tang Ning. Qianchuo watched him leave before sighing leisurely. The reason why the Tang family's old house was confiscated was because it was originally a reward from the imperial court. The Tang family could buy it back again with money. At that time, he would randomly offer a price of 100,000 or 200,000 taels. For the sake of face, the Tang family also will consider. Now it only sells for less than 30% of the price he expected. This is a big loss for the Ministry of Revenue. But if he had 10 more courages, he would not dare to rip off someone. If he took an extra 100,000 taels from him, the Ministry of Revenue might have to pay 1,000,000 taels tomorrow, and the gains outweighed the losses. Less than an hour after Tang Ning left the household department, another officer reported that Tang Qi, the former prince of the country, was visiting. Although Tang Qi was already a commoner, Prince Duan was at the height of his power in the court, and the Tang family might not be able to turn around in the future. Out of caution, Qianchuo still received him in person. Tang Qi didn't talk nonsense and said straight to the point, "The Tang family wants to buy back the old house. Qian Shangshi should set a price." Qianchuo was stunned, and then said, "I'm afraid this won't work." "Why?" Tang Qi frowned and said, "No matter how much Qian Shangshi bids, the Tang family will redeem the old house." "It's not about money." Qianchuo shook his head and said, "It's just that you're a step late. The old Tang mansion has been bought." Tang Qi was furious when he heard this and asked, "Who is it?" "Qianchuo Dao, an hour ago, Marquis Dingguo just took the house deed from the Ministry of Household Affairs." "Him?" Tang Qi was shocked and asked, "What does he want from the Tang family's old house?" Qianchuo looked at him and said, "Marquis Dingguo said he wanted to raise pigs, but I don't know what he will raise specifically." Raise pigs." Tang Qi opened his mouth wide, his eyes widened, and his face turned the color of pig liver. Inside the Tang mansion, Tang Shui looked at Tang Ning and wondered, "Are you really planning to raise pigs in the Tang family?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "The place is big enough. I'm going to destroy the Tang mansion and rebuild it. I'll build the largest pigsty in the capital. Do you think it's feasible?" "No." Even more excited than Tang Shui was Princess Anyang. The old residence of the Tang family was located in an area where the powerful people of the capital gathered. Her princess mansion was not far from the Tang family. If the Tang family became a pigsty, what would happen around her princess mansion in the future? "Don't you want it to stink to the sky?" Tang Ning glanced at her and asked, "What does this have to do with the princess?" Princess Anyang said, "The Tang mansion is surrounded by powerful people. If you let those powerful officials live next to dirty and smelly fat pigs, aren't you afraid of offending them all?" Tang Ning said indifferently, "Have I offended many powerful officials?" The Princess of Anyang was speechless for a moment. In the past few years, he had offended many powerful officials. But in the end, he himself was an extremely popular minister, beneath one person and above 10,000 people. The officials he offended were dismissed from their posts, and their honors were dismissed. Forget it, who else dares to offend him without opening his eyes? Princess Anyang's chest heaved with anger, and she gritted her teeth and said, "Anyway, if you dare to turn the Tang family into a pigsty, I will not let you go." After Princess Anyang finished speaking, she angrily walked to the pavilion on the side. Tang Shui looked at her and said in surprise, "Didn't you tell me that if it were you, you would also raise pigs in the old house of Tang Mansion?" She looked at Princess Anyang, then looked back at Tang Ning, and said, "You guys really have a good understanding." But, Princess Anyang, who has always presented herself as a lady, said angrily, "Who has a connection with him? If it were me, I would not raise pigs even if I let a beggar live there." Raising pigs in the Tang family's old house was just a casual excuse given by Tang Ning to the Ministry of Revenue. He was not an unqualified person. If pigs were raised there, the air would be noisy and smelly. How could other people live? He handed the key to the Tang family to Lu Laoer and said, "Isn't the beggar's clan not enough space? This is the key to the Tang family's old house. You can turn it into a stronghold of the beggar's clan. There are 2 courtyards inside. Keep it and have it cleaned regularly, and you can use the rest as you wish. The location of the Tang family's old residence is very good. Most of the wealthy families in Beijing are there. If some members of the beggar clan are stationed there, it will be more convenient and easier to obtain information." Lu Laoer bowed and said, "Thank you, gang leader." After settling this matter, Tang Ning planned to teach Zhao Yuan how to make soup. This is a new soup. It is a mutton soup recipe that Tang Ning learned on the grassland. After he came back, he improved it a little. It uses mutton and supplements traditional Chinese medicine. It can strengthen the glands and replenish qi, warm and nourish kidney yang, and is good for treating fatigue, weight loss, and glutinous rice. It has very good effects and is just right for Chen Huang. Zhao Yuan put the ingredients into the casserole and asked, "Sir, how long does the soup need to simmer?" Tang Ning said, "About 5 hours." Zhao Yuan had a look of defeat on his face and said, "Ah, it's been so long." Tang Ning glanced at him and asked, "What, are you in a hurry?" Zhao Yuan is now 2 times thinner than before because of the torture by Zhangde Xiushi. He studies for 5 hours every day and can only rest for 1 day every 10 days. Tang Ning can understand him and said, "You are not needed here. Go and have fun. Remember to stew for 5 hours next time. It's not urgent." Zhao Yuan scratched his head and said, "Sister Wang asked me to go to their house for dinner in the afternoon, and Sister Zhang also asked me to go to their house for dinner. Whose house should I go to?" Tang Ning glanced at him and asked, "Do you often go to Wang's and Zhang's houses for dinner?" Zhao Yuan nodded and said, "Aunt Wang Aunt Zhang is very kind to me and often invites me to their house for dinner." Prime Minister Wang and Grand Secretary Zhang were arguing fiercely in the court and were irreconcilable. However, they were surprisingly consistent in their attitude towards Zhao Yuan. Tang Ning cursed him as an old fox in his heart and said, "It's only morning now. You can go to Wang's house in the morning and Zhang's house in the afternoon. Isn't that enough?" Zhao Yuan touched his head embarrassedly and said, "I have to go to Bai's house in the morning." Tang Ning was very pleased that Zhao Yuan was also making every effort to deal with his own future and destiny. This was worthy of the people behind him who planned and laid out for him. Zhao Yuan left without eating breakfast, and by the afternoon, the mutton soup was already cooked. Tang Shui and Princess Anyang were invited to dinner by Xiaoai. During the meal, Princess Anyang looked at Tang Ning with some concern and asked, "You are not really planning to raise pigs in the Tang family, are you?" No. Tang Ning shook his head and said, "There are still many homeless beggars in the capital. I plan to renovate the Tang family and provide them with a shelter." Princess Anyang looked at him blankly and said, "You?" Tang Ning asked, "What's wrong? Isn't this okay?" "Okay. You are really kind." Princess Anyang gritted her teeth and nodded heavily, cursing inwardly that this guy was just a worm in her stomach. She didn't dare to look at Tang Shui, and lowered her head to drink soup to cover up her embarrassment. Tang Ning glanced at her, then looked at Zhong Yi, Su are you, and the others, and said, drink more soup. This is what King Run cooked. It took more than 5 hours. Zhong Yi picked up the spoon and asked, what kind of soup is this? Tang Ning said, secret mutton soup. Drinking it can strengthen the glands and replenish qi, warm and nourish the kidney yang, and treat asthenia and weight loss. If you can't drink the juice, you should drink more. Click. Princess Anyang's hand trembled, and the spoon in her hand fell into the bowl. The soup in the bowl was empty. Warm Ti. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 764. Tang Ning was kicked off the table by several women when she was halfway through her meal. It was a pity that the soup made by Zhao Yuan was not only nutritious but also tasted good. Compared with Zhao Yuan, who was focused on making soup and picking up girls, several other princes in the capital were working tirelessly. Among them, the one in which King Duan tore King Huai to pieces was the most intense. In the past 2 days in the court, he had almost always been against King Huai. Tang Ning originally wondered if it was because King Huai was talking to him that day and King Duan saw him. But now it seems that it was not the case. How could anyone do this for such an inexplicable reason? Provoking such a big dispute in the court. King Huai still didn't respond to King Duan's fierce attack, which surprised Tang Ning. Although King Huai seemed to be indifferent to the world, he was definitely not an easy man. Even Tang Ning was unwilling to provoke him for no reason, but King Duan didn't care at all. Ignorant people are indeed fearless. Prince Huai's mansion. Unlike King Duan and King Kong, King Huai had never actively participated in seizing the heir, and there were no advisors in the mansion, only a few maids and servants. At this time, King Huai and Princess Huai were dining in the hall. After Princess Huai sat down, she didn't move her chopsticks. She raised her head and asked, have you encountered any trouble in court affairs recently? King Huai looked at her, smiled and said, where did you hear that? It's nothing. Princess Huai said, I heard that Prince Duan has been causing trouble for you these days. King Huai shook his head and said nonchalantly, don't worry, I can handle it, you don't have to worry about this. After he finished speaking, a servant knocked on the door, walked in from the outside, and said, Your Highness, I have something important to report. King Huai turned around and said, let him wait a moment. I will go over after eating. The servant looked hesitant and said, Lord Sia said that His Highness Prince Duan's people made trouble in the Imperial College and injured several doctors. Please come over quickly. Princess Huai looked at him and said, the court affairs are important, Your Highness should go there first. King Huai glanced at the servant, looked at her, nodded and said, then I will go to the Imperial College first, and then I will have dinner with you in the afternoon. Princess Huai nodded and said, Your Highness, please go down. King Huai stood up, and when he walked out of the hall, he paused, looked in a certain direction, and murmured, it will never end. Inside the Imperial Academy, it was a mess. The Imperial College has always been divided into 2 camps. Tang Qi, who offered sacrifices to the Imperial College, belonged to the Duan Wang camp, but he did not dominate the Imperial College with one hand, and some officials did not fall to Duan Wang. Now that Tang Qi has left, one of the 2 ministers is close to King Duan, and the other has not chosen to take sides. And because the real person in charge of the Imperial College is King Huai, they are automatically considered to be in the King Huai camp. King Duan couldn't do anything to King Huai, so he took action from his officials. The 2 ministers seized power and turned the Imperial Academy upside down. When King Huai arrived, a minister with a bandage on his forehead said angrily, Lawless, lawless. Prince Duan is not the prince or the emperor yet. I want to report to the court and your majesty. King Huai waved his hand and said with a smile, forget it, give him whatever he wants. Why don't Su Siyi go home to recover from his injury for a month? How can this be done? Su Siyi waved his hand suddenly and said, they were already so arrogant when I was here. What if I leave? Go back. King Huai looked at him and said, I will give you a month's leave. During this month, you no longer have to deal with the affairs of the Imperial College. Your Highness. Let's go back. Yeah, the Imperial son, looked at King Huai, pursed his lips, and finally nodded and said, I obey your orders. King Huai looked at him and said, don't forget, before you leave, hand over everything in your hands to Wang Siyi. Su Siyi was stunned and asked, everything? King Huai nodded and said, everything. Su Siyi looked away, nodded and said, I'll get it done right away. After leaving the Imperial Academy, King Huai had just walked back to Prince Huai's mansion when another official came to report that they were responsible for the implementation of the new tax system in the capital, but King Duan stepped in and snatched it away. King Huai waved his hand and said, give it all to him too. He walked back to the palace, looked at a servant, and said, when the king and the princess are together from now on, no matter what happens, don't disturb me. Do you understand? The servant immediately said, I know. The old residence of the Tang family in the capital became a beggar's residence overnight, causing widespread discussion in a small area. The Tang family used to be high and mighty, but now their old house is occupied by beggars. No one knows how Tang Huai and Tang Qi feel. But what they were sure of was that Marquis Dingguo's move was not just out of good intentions, to give these homeless people a shelter from the wind and rain. He has already caused the Tang family to lose everything, and now he wants to give the Tang family a heavy blow on the spiritual level. The East District of the capital, where the Tang family's old residence is located, is surrounded by officials and dignitaries. For them, they naturally do not want their neighbors to be lowly beggars, but the beggars who live here are all honest and do not disturb other people. With their own lives, these powerful people just let them go. After all, Marquis Dingguo just let these beggars live here and did not raise pigs in the Tang family's old house. No one would offend a plague god because of this trivial matter. King Huai had already demonstrated to them the consequences of offending the god of plague. Under the mad dog-like attack of King Duan, King Huai not only lost control of the Imperial College, but the tax reform that he had been promoting under His Majesty's order was also plucked by King Duan at the critical moment. King Duan is already a mad dog. How can they dare to provoke someone who even a mad dog would not dare to provoke? Tang Ning learned from Xiaoju that his nickname had been changed to God of Plague. For him, being called the God of Plague is better than being called the Broom Star. The Broom Star is hated by everyone, and the God of Plague is feared by everyone. He prefers to be the latter. Xiaoju looked at him and said, the God of Plague is the God of Plague. It sounds better than a mad dog. King Huai was miserable. He was chased and bitten by a mad dog. He had no rights in the first place, and half of them were taken away by King Duan. Tang Ning looked at him and asked, have you ever seen a tiger killed by a mad dog? Xiaoju was stunned for a moment and asked, what do you mean? Tang Ning said, even a tiger that has temporarily restrained its fangs is not something a mad dog can deal with. Xiaoju was stunned and asked, you mean, King Huai is that tiger? Tang Ning looked at him and asked, the capital is in such deep water, and there are constant undercurrents. As a prince who can participate in politics, and has been wandering around the court for so many years, do you think that King Huai made mistakes? Xiaoju thought about it carefully and said in shock, no. King Duan and King Kong have been fighting for so many years. Both sides have seized each other's leverage and attacked each other, but King Huai has almost never been involved. It's not that they don't want to, it's that they simply can't get hold of King Huai. Have you ever seen anyone who can do this without leaving any trace behind, being in a whirlpool but never getting involved? Tang Ning smiled and said, "This is the real beast." Yu Xiaoju looked at him directly and said, "Only you involve others, others have never involved you. He is a beast and you are a beast." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 765. The text of Ruyi Xiaolang Jun, Chapter 760, No dispute. Prime Minister Feng has fallen, the Tang family is finished, and Prince Kong has become the heir to the throne. Xiaoju looked at him and said, "Since you came to Beijing, there have been at least 80 officials and dignitaries who have fallen into your hands. Compared with you, Prince Huai is nothing. If he is a beast, you are the beast among beasts." Tang Ning did not reject the evaluation of a beast. Usually docile and kind to others, but when others challenge his bottom line, he turns into a beast that chooses people to eat. This is an advantage, not a disadvantage. Prince Duan took the credit of Prince Huai and took over the department he was in charge of, winning a great victory. As a complete loser, Prince Huai has not even stepped out of Prince Huai's mansion in the past 2 days. In Prince Duan's mansion, Prince Kong was depressed and Prince Huai was vulnerable. The high-spirited Prince Duan did not feel proud for long, and a servant came to report that someone was making trouble at the gate of the Imperial College. "Who is so bold as to cause trouble at the gate of the Imperial College?" Prince Duan's face darkened and he said, "Break their legs and throw them out." The Imperial College official looked bitter and said, "Your Highness, these people cannot be beaten." Prince Duan frowned and asked, "Why?" The official said, "Your Highness, those who blocked the Imperial College are all Jiangnan students who stayed in the capital. Behind them are Jiangnan officials in the court. No government office can afford the crime of beating candidates. Scholars have a transcendent status in the state of Chen. Even a small scholar can discuss important officials in the court. These people often like to stick together. If they are dissatisfied with a national policy, they will sit at the gate of the government office to protest. The government office cannot beat or scold them, which has always been a headache." Prince Duan looked at him and asked, "The students in Jiangnan don't study hard. They are just bored and blocking the Imperial College." "Why?" the Imperial College official explained, "Your Highness, you don't know that these days, Prince Huai has been ordered by His Majesty to redistribute the quotas of candidates in each state. After this allocation, the number of candidates in Jiangnan has dropped by 30%. The candidates in Jiangnan certainly disagreed, so they gathered in the Imperial College to make trouble and forced the Imperial College to revise the proportion of candidates in Jiangnan. Because the educational resources in different places are different, the resources allocated to each state in the imperial examination of the state of Chen are different. In areas such as Jiangnan and Jingji that focus on education, there are many talented people, so there are more quotas for candidates, while in remote areas such as Fengzhou and Shenzhou, there are much fewer quotas for candidates. In fact, in each imperial examination, the number of candidates in Jingji and Jiangnan has reached more than 70% of all candidates. Some of these candidates will be in the court in the future. For local prefectures, they naturally hope to have more officials with local origins. The states were naturally dissatisfied with the fact that Jiangnan and the capital monopolized the quota for candidates, and they often petitioned to increase the quota. However, if the quota increased, it would inevitably decrease. The states often fought to the death for this, and the dispute between Jiangnan and the capital was the most intense. Prince Duan knew all this, and he looked at the official with dissatisfaction and said, "This is the decision made by Prince Huai, why are you looking for me?" The official said helplessly, "Because the Imperial College is in our hands now." Prince Duan's face showed a trace of depression, and he said, "Then give Jiangnan more quotas, isn't that enough?" "This is absolutely not possible." The Imperial College official said, "The reason why Prince Huai wants to adjust the quota of Juran is because after the Jiangnan incident, His Majesty felt that the power of the Jiangnan party in the court was too strong and wanted to weaken it. If we give Jiangnan more quotas, wouldn't that be disobeying the king's order? Prince Duan's face showed anger, and he shouted, "This is not possible, that is not possible, what do you want me to do?" As soon as he finished speaking, another official rushed in, Your Highness, Your Highness, Your Majesty, something bad is going to happen." When Prince Duan saw the official's anxious look, he felt a nameless anger in his heart and said angrily, "What's the matter again?" The official said, "I just learned that many gentry and dignitaries in the capital area are about to jointly impeach Your Highness." Prince Duan was stunned, and then he was furious, "Why are they impeaching me for no reason?" The official explained, "In order to make the court's tax collection more convenient and faster, Your Majesty ordered Prince Huai to streamline the tax system." Prince Huai abolished many miscellaneous taxes. Although this procedure is simple, it affects the interests of these gentry and dignitaries. How can they agree? Prince Duan stood there in a daze, and finally reacted, and said sternly, "Zhao Rui, you dare to set a trap for me." The gate of the Imperial College was blocked by students from Jiangnan, and it has not been opened for 3 days. Several officials from Prince Duan who were temporarily transferred to revise the tax system, the impeachment of them flew into the Shaanxi province like snowflakes in the past few days. The students from Jiangnan had good reasons to block the gate of the Imperial College. The number of juren allocated to each state was related to the state's future status in the court. Jiangnan was implicated by the fall of Prime Minister Feng a year ago, and half of the power in the court was lost. Now they want to touch their number of juren, which is equivalent to digging up their roots. This is naturally intolerable. Every grievance has its perpetrator, and their creditors are the Imperial College and Prince Duan. The tax system of the state of Chen has many items. In some places, even the officials of the Ministry of Revenue do not understand it. Some tax items themselves are unclear and ambiguous. It is a heavy task for the court to collect taxes every year. King Huai, following the order of Emperor Chen, streamlined the tax system. What should go and what should be kept were kept. The tax items suddenly became clear. The clear tax items meant that there were no loopholes to exploit. Those gentry, wealthy families, and powerful people who had already benefited from it. How can such people accept it? King Duan is now the person in charge of this project, and he must bear the blame. Both of these matters are not easy to solve. If the scholars get together, the imperial court will be troubled. The imperial power does not go down to the grassroots. Chen Guo from the county down actually relies on the local gentry and wealthy families. Their combined strength cannot be underestimated. All in all, the capital was in a state of chaos these days, and it was hard to read all the official documents in the Ministry of Education. Tang Ning simply took 2 days of sick leave to spend time with his wife at home. From this incident, it can be seen that there is at least 10 kings of Kong between King Duan and King Huai. These two big scapegoats were not easy to shoulder given the identity and status of Prince Huai. Even a prince like Duan Wang who had half a foot in the East Palace would be overwhelmed and unable to breathe. He seemed to have taken advantage of what happened a few days ago, but in fact he was just taking the blame for King Huai. Even Tang Ning thought that the Tang family's strategy of shrinking down was tailor-made for Prince Duan. If the enemy can't move, I won't be able to move. The only way a tortoise can live long is if he doesn't move. King Duan is obviously not as far-sighted as a tortoise. In the imperial study room, Emperor Chen looked at the mountains of papers sent by the Ministry of Education and said angrily, "What the hell happened to me?" Wei Jian stepped forward and whispered, "Your Majesty, calm down. It is my decree that Prince Duan go back to the palace to rest and do not touch the court affairs again." Emperor Chen waved his hand and said, "In addition, summon Prince Huai to the palace." After a while, King Huai stood in the imperial study, bowed his hands to Emperor Chen, and said, "Back to my father, these two matters are serious. I originally wanted to proceed step by step, but I didn't expect that the emperor would be so radical. This is the end of the matter, I have nothing else to do. Chen Huang looked at him, frowned and said, you don't know how much he weighs. For such an important court matter, can you give it to him if he wants it? King Huai bowed even lower and said, the elders and younger ones are in order. Since the imperial brother wants it, how can I not deny it to my son? Chen Huang looked at him and said angrily, when will you change your attitude of not fighting for anything? Fortunate young gentleman author, Wrong Xiao Wrong. Chapter 766. Prince Duan's Mansion. Prince Duan sat on the chair dejectedly, like an eggplant hit by frost. He had not been involved in state affairs for a long time. He finally came out of retirement, but ended up like this, making him lose face in front of all the officials. The imperial edict from the palace clearly stated that from today on, he was not allowed to interfere in state affairs. As for when it would end, the imperial edict did not say. That was to prohibit him from participating in politics indefinitely. Prince Duan could understand the meaning of the imperial edict. It was nothing more than that his father disliked him for not being able to accomplish things, but for causing troubles, and for causing troubles for students in Jiangnan and dignitaries in Beijing. Prince Duan's depression at this moment could not be described in words. These troubles were originally caused by Prince Huai. He spent so much effort, but he only snatched 2 black pots from Prince Huai. This was a case of losing more than the wife and losing the army. Now he has taken the blame, and the power has returned to the hands of King Huai, which has also made his father more dissatisfied with him. No matter how you look at it, he has suffered a great loss. He regretted not listening to the Tang family at this moment. As long as he did nothing, nothing would go wrong. But he was really worried that Tang Ning would assist King Huai. If Tang Ning turned to King Huai, how could he stay in the palace and do nothing at ease? Prince Duan was tormented and tangled in his heart. He held his head and scratched his hair unconsciously. He actually pulled off a lot of hair. Prince Duan was stunned, and stretched out his hand to scratch again, and more hair fell off his head. His body trembled, his face pale, and he immediately said, Imperial physician, call the imperial physician. When the news that Prince Duan's hair fell out because of excessive worry reached the palace of Prince Kong almost laughed so hard that he couldn't straighten his waist. I am dying of laughter. How nice it would be to be his tortoise, but he had to jump out to help Zhao Rui take the blame. I have never seen such a stupid person. Such a stupid person, but my father actually wants to pass the throne to him. Isn't he afraid that Chen will be defeated by him? I am so worried that my hair has fallen off. Haha, a bald emperor, it is simply unheard of. At the same time, in the Huaiwang mansion, the Huaiwang accompanied the Huaiwang consort to walk in the garden. At a certain moment, the Huaiwang consort tilted her head and looked at him and asked, Your Highness was worried about the students in Jiangnan and the dignitaries in Beijing a few days ago. Has it been resolved now? The Huaiwang smiled and said, It has been resolved. The Huaiwang consort showed curiosity on her face and said, Didn't your Highness say before that this matter would offend the students and dignitaries if he went forward, and would make His Majesty dissatisfied if he retreated? It was a dilemma. How did it get resolved so quickly? The Huaiwang raised his head and smiled, Maybe it's just luck. The Duanwang was silent for a long time. He jumped out for a few days and was kicked out of the court by the Chen Emperor again. Prince Duan has a magical ability, that is, the ability to mess things up. In the past few days, Jiangnan students and gentry and dignitaries almost quarreled with the entire capital. Emperor Chen had no choice but to choose to appease them first, temporarily not to change the imperial examination quota, and the tax reform was also postponed indefinitely. Prince Duan is trying to prove to Emperor Chen and the court officials that he has no talent or virtue, and there is nothing he can't mess up. When he becomes emperor, there will be more such things. Tang Ning looked at Xiaoju in surprise and asked, "You said that compared with Prince Huai, Prince Duan is obviously far inferior. Why did your majesty recognize Prince Duan?" Xiaoju looked at him and asked, "Do you really not know, or are you pretending not to know?" Tang Ning glanced at him and said, "If you have something to say, just say it, stop talking nonsense." Xiaoju shook his head and said, "Prince Huai's mother, concubine Yang, is just a commoner woman. Prince Huai is born of a commoner woman. His identity is different from other princes and he will never become an emperor." Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "The Tang family is now he is also a commoner." "That's different," Xiaoju explained, "the Tang family has a deep foundation. As long as your majesty favors, it can be revived at any time. When your majesty was still the prince, you met Yang Fei, the mother of the prince. She has no identity or background." I see. Tang Ning shook his head gently and said, "I remember that when your majesty was still the prince, he already had several concubines. I didn't expect that he would not even let go of common women. There is no one more lustful than him in the whole capital." Xiaoju looked at him and said nothing. Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "What does your eyes mean?" Xiaoju looked away and said, "Nothing." Tang Ning was not very satisfied with Xiaoju's performance in recent days, especially his eyes. He used the same eyes when he said he was a beast last time. Since the last time there were ears outside the wall, Xiaoju liked to use his eyes to convey information, reflecting his growing desire to survive. In this way, Tang Ning had no effective way to retaliate except to beat him up. After Prince Duan took the blame, the number of impeachment memorials from the Ministry of Shangshu finally decreased, and Tang Ning's work became much easier. If the work intensity was that high every day, he would be as worried as Prince Duan, and his hair would fall out. Although officials in the state of Chen had to get up very early in the morning, they were dismissed at 3 p.m., which was equivalent to 3 p.m. in later generations. After the dismissal, the government did not restrict the freedom of officials. He did not go home after the dismissal today. Before leaving home in the morning, Xiaoi told him that they were playing in a garden in the capital today, and asked him to go there directly after the dismissal. The garden was Zhao Man's garden, which was given to her by Emperor Chen some time ago. No outsiders would enter on weekdays. When Tang Ning came to the yard, she realized that they had arranged it very beautifully. There was a large lawn in the garden, and there was a pavilion in the middle of the lawn. The pavilion was filled with fruit plates and delicacies. Before Tang Ning walked over, she smelled a fragrance. "You're here." Zhao Man ran over from a distance, jumped up and hung on him. This garden is her private garden. They are the only ones in the garden, so they are not afraid of this. Tang Ning picked her up and spun her around. Zhao Man covered her waist, giggled, got off him, and said, "Go over there, the sisters are all there." Outside the park, a carriage slowly stopped, and a figure stepped down from it. Emperor Chen looked at the guard at the door, looked at Wei Jian behind him, and asked, "What's going on?" Wei Jian smiled and said, "Your Majesty, have you forgotten that you rewarded Princess Pingyang with this garden last time?" Chen Huang was stunned for a moment, and after recalling it for a while, he finally remembered that such a thing really happened, and said, "I really forgot." Wei Jian looked at the guard at the door and said, "It looks like the princess is inside today." Several guards at the door had already knelt down, and one of them said, "Your Majesty, I will inform the princess right now." "No need." Chen Huang waved his hand and said, "I'm just strolling around." After saying that, he stepped in. Entering the garden, he looked around and said, "Pingyang has done a good job of repairing this garden." When he was about to pass through a small forest, a woman's laughter came from the front. Chen Huang looked over and said, "There seem to be a lot of people over there." Wei Jian looked up and said, "Your Majesty, those seem to be Mr. Tang's wives. The princess has a close relationship with them on weekdays." They should have gone out to play together today. Chen Huang took a few steps forward, then paused. He looked back at Wei Jian and said, "You know everything. Why don't you explain to me why Pingyang is lying in Tang Ning's arms? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 767. Wei Jian and Chen Huang stood in the forest, looking ahead blankly, pursed their lips, and said, This may be a misunderstanding. Chen Huang said solemnly, then Pingyang hugged his neck and kissed his face. Was it a misunderstanding? Wei Jian sighed, lowered his head, and said helplessly, Your Majesty, I can't explain this. How courageous! Emperor Chen gritted his teeth and said, You already have so many wives, but you still dare to provoke my princess. Is there any man in this capital who is more lustful and bold than him? Wei Jian lowered his head, glanced at him vaguely, and said nothing. What a royal disgrace! Emperor Chen waved his sleeves and said, Go back to the palace. Ah, Wei Jian's expression was startled. Although His Majesty was angry, he did not go over directly. Lei Lei's angry questioning was really unexpected. They don't think it's embarrassing, but I still think it's embarrassing. Chen Huang turned and walked into the forest with a dark face, returning along the original path. At the gate of the garden, I saw Emperor Chen walking out shortly after entering. The guard at the gate bowed and said, See Your Majesty. Emperor Chen glanced at them and said, Don't tell anyone about my visit today, including the princess. Several guards had doubts on their faces, but they could not disobey the king's orders, so they immediately bowed and nodded, yes. Chen Huang returned to the imperial study in silence, and Wei Jian followed him step by step, feeling uneasy in his heart. There were only two people in the imperial study, Chen Huang and Wei Jian. He stopped, sighed, and said, I haven't seen Manner smiling so happily for a long time. Wei Jian lowered his head and said nothing. Chen Huang looked at him and asked, Don't you talk a lot of nonsense when talking about that kid? What's wrong today? You're mute. Wei Jian raised his head and said angrily, Your Majesty, this old slave was blind and misjudged the wrong person. I didn't expect that Mr. Tang relied on Your Majesty's favor to pacify the south of the Yangtze River and the northwest, and made great contributions to the country. He already has several wives and concubines, and he is having an affair with the princess, and he is openly defying the majesty of the royal family. The old slave feels that this matter must be severely punished. Oh, Chen Huang glanced at him and asked, What kind of severe punishment? Not killing him is not enough to establish authority, Wei Jian said, capture him immediately and put him in jail, and he will be executed at another day. Cough, cough, Chen Huang coughed a few times, looked at him and asked, Are you kidding me? Wei Jian looked confused and said, Why did Your Majesty say this? If I kill him on another day, who will I use to kill him in the future? Emperor Chen looked at him and said, The threat from the western region has not been eliminated, the grassland has not been stable for a long time, Gizhu has become more and more chaotic, and Xifen has taken the opportunity to spy on you. At this time, if I kill him, who else in the court can replace him? Wei Jian smiled coquettishly and said, Everything depends on Your Majesty's decision. Chen Huang was silent for a long time and said, I owed Manner too much before. He looked at Wei Jian again, gritted his teeth and said, Go and summon Tang Ning for me. In Zhao Man's garden, Zhao Man leaned against Tang Ning's chest. The breeze blew up her black hair, tickling Tang Ning's face. Zhao Man held his hand, drew circles on it, and asked, When are we leaving? What she envied was the upright and honest situation with her sweetheart, not like this, just leaning in his arms and hiding from everyone. Tang Ning stroked her hair and said, It's almost over. Tang Yao Yao has already arranged for the caravan to go to the grassland. For Tangning, the grassland is undoubtedly a better place to settle than Gizhu. It will take some time for them to take root there. When Sumei comes back, they can actually set off, and they don't really have to wait until the 3-year period with Wanyanyan is over. If Sumei goes well, this time can be compressed to within 1 year. Zhao Man sighed and said, "It would be great if my father could agree." Tang Ning smiled and said nothing more. Even if Emperor Chen knew about it, he would not let their affairs be made public. He cared more about the royal family's face. When Tang Ning, Zhong Yi, and the others returned home, they were surprised to see Wei Jian at the Tang family. When he saw Tang Ning, he smiled and said, "Master Tang, you are back." Tang Ning looked at him and said in surprise, "Mr. Wei, this is..." Wei Jian said, "Your Majesty has summoned you and asked Mr. Tang to follow us into the palace." It was already the time for the yamen. Emperor Chen always liked to summon others during the yamen and the rest of the court, without taking into account the mood of his ministers. Generally speaking, if it was a general summons, Emperor Chen would send a eunuch at random. As long as Wei Jian came out of the palace in person, there must be something big going on. Nothing major happened in the court recently. Tang Ning got on the carriage, looked at Wei Jian, and asked, "I wonder why your Majesty is looking for me this time." "Your Majesty didn't say." Wei Jian shook his head and said, "We don't know, and we don't dare to ask." As Chen Huang's personal little cotton-padded jacket, he follows Chen Huang all day long. It's strange that he doesn't know. Tang Ning took out an apple from her sleeve and asked with a smile, "Manager Wei, do you want to eat the apple?" A moment later, 2 people were sitting on the carriage, each chewing half an apple. Tang Ning looked at Wei Jian and asked, "When General Manager Wei left, was your Majesty happy or angry?" Wei Jian took a bite of the apple and said, "Your Majesty is very angry." Looking at Wei Jian's eyes, Tang Ning had a bad feeling in her heart. Wei Jian looked at him and asked with a smile, "Master Tang is very knowledgeable. We have a question to ask Master Tang." Tang Ning said, "Manager Wei just said it's okay." Wei Jian smiled and said, "I wonder if Mr. Tang prefers a son or a daughter. Which man doesn't want a well-behaved little princess?" Tang Ning did not hesitate and said, "My daughter." Wei Jian thought for a while and said, "If Mr. Tang has a daughter, and suddenly one day, Mr. Tang sees her lying in the arms of a man, what will you do?" Tang Ning said, "It depends on when it is." Wei Jiandao, we are in our prime years, and we are waiting to be married. Tang Ning continued to ask, "What is a man like?" Wei Jian said, "He is a handsome young man with a handsome appearance and a dignified appearance." Tang Ning shook her head and said, "You can't look at the outside when looking at a person, but also look at the inside." Wei Jian smiled and said, "Inside, he is the same as Mr. Tang. He is knowledgeable about the past and present, and has great talents. At a young age, he holds great power and is a hero of the world. Both male seniors should get married, and female seniors should get married." Tang Ning sighed and said, "My daughters will get married. As long as they really like it, of course I will be happy." Wei Jian looked at him and asked, "What if he, like Mr. Tang, has 4 wives and concubines at home?" Tang Ning's face darkened and she said, "Let me see if I don't break his legs." After he finished speaking, his expression was startled, and he slowly looked at Wei Jian. Wei Jian smiled slightly, looked away, took a bite of the apple, and said, "This apple is so sweet." Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 768. Tang Ning sat in the carriage, silent for a long time, and asked, "Has His Majesty left the palace today?" Wei Jian nodded and said, "I accompanied His Majesty to go out and relax today. We went to the garden that His Majesty gave to Princess Pingyang. Emperor Chen left the palace today and went to that garden. He was very angry when he came back, that is, he saw Zhao Man leaning on his arms, and it is very likely that he saw her kissing him. Tang Ning rubbed his head and said, "General Manager Wei, I suddenly have a headache, why don't we? You can run away from the monk but not the temple, you can escape from the first day of the month but not the 15th day. Wei Jian sighed and said, "Lord Tang, please come with us to see His Majesty, otherwise, it will not be us who will invite Lord Tang later. If you don't want others to know, don't do it yourself. If you often walk by the river, you will get your shoes wet. If you walk too much at night, you will always meet ghosts." Tang Ning sat in the carriage, and countless proverbs emerged in his mind. Without any precautions or worries, Emperor Chen appeared in the garden where he and Zhao Man were hugging each other. People always have double standards. The same thing happens to oneself and to others, and there are two different sets of judgment standards. Tang Ning didn't want her daughter to be a concubine for others, so Emperor Chen's anger was understandable. When he was caught by his father while stealing someone else's daughter, Emperor Chen didn't rush out at that time. It must have been a result of great restraint. Wei Jian saw that he looked depressed, looked at him, and comforted him, "Don't worry, Lord Tang, His Majesty will only break your legs at most, and will not really take your life." Tang Ning glanced at him and said, "Thank you for reminding me." Wei Jian smiled and said, "You're welcome." Tang Ning didn't believe that Emperor Chen would break his legs. He knew Emperor Chen as well as he could. 2 years ago, or a year ago, he would definitely not enter the palace with Wei Jian now. But this is a different time. Although he was still a little uneasy at this moment, he was also very clear that he could walk in today and walk out. Otherwise, Emperor Chen would not have sent Wei Jian to summon him. After entering the palace and coming to the door of the imperial study, Tang Ning stood for a long time before taking a deep breath and slowly walked in. He walked to the center of the hall and bowed, saying, "Your Majesty, I pay my respects to you." Emperor Chen was reading a memorial without raising his head and asked, "Have you heard about the riots of students from Jiangnan in the Imperial College?" Emperor Chen was calmer than Tang Ning expected and did not ask him about what happened today. Instead, he talked about the riot in the Imperial College. Tang Ning was stunned for a moment and nodded, "Your Majesty, I heard about it." Emperor Chen said, "I'll leave this matter to you. Is there a problem?" Tang Ning was surprised and said, "Your Majesty, hasn't this matter been settled?" "That's because I took a step back and did not reduce the number of candidates from Jiangnan." Emperor Chen slammed the memorial on the table and said angrily, "What kind of solution is this?" No solution, why are you so angry?" Tang Ning looked up and glanced at him, saying, "Your Majesty, no problem." "Okay, you said it." Emperor Chen glanced at him and said, "I want to reduce the number of candidates in Jiangnan, and they must have no objection to this, and they must be convinced and convinced. If you can't do it, I will only ask you." Emperor Chen was venting his anger and deliberately making things difficult, but he was in the wrong first. Tang Ning sighed and said, "I obey your order." Emperor Chen snorted coldly and continued, "The Ministry of Revenue has implemented tax reforms, simplified taxes and improved tax efficiency, but the gentry and dignitaries in the capital have united to oppose it." Without waiting for Emperor Chen to finish, Tang Ning nodded and said, "It's up to me." He had already understood what Emperor Chen was thinking. Instead of being spitted at by him, he might as well be more conscious. Emperor Chen continued, "After Prime Minister Zhou resigned, there was only Prime Minister Wang in the Secretariat. Prime Minister Wang was old and weak, and the memorial from the Secretariat. The memorial from the Secretariat, I'll take a look. The trade between Chen and the grasslands requires detailed rules and regulations, and the important officials in the court have no experience in this. I'll come up with the details. Princess Pingyang lives alone outside the palace, with no one to take care of her. I'll take care of the princess. Don't let me hear about the riots of students in the south of the Yangtze River, The petitions of the gentry and dignitaries, the repeated postponement of the details, and the secretariat don't let me hear that Pingyang has been wronged, or that the princess of the royal family has a private affair with someone, which will damage the reputation of the royal family. Emperor Chen looked at him and said, if any of this matter is not done well, I will follow Wei Jian's advice and chop off your head. Do you have a problem with that? Tang Ning bowed and said, Your Majesty, no. If not, get out of the palace and don't bother me in front of me. I'll take my leave. Tang Ning walked out of the imperial study, and Wei Jian stood at the door, looking at him with a smile. Tang Ning bowed to him and said, Thank you, General Manager Wei. Wei Jian smiled and said, Lord Tang is polite. The person closest to Emperor Chen is not concubine Tang Hui, concubine Fang Shu, or Prince Duan and Prince Kong, but this old eunuch who always looks kind. Sometimes, his words can even change a person's life or death, or the outcome of a court event. There are only benefits and no harm in establishing a good relationship with Wei Jian, so Tang Ning decided to bring him more apples. The result of this visit to the palace was very different from what Tang Ning expected. Emperor Chen was obviously very angry, but he did not vent it directly, but directed it to other places, using these things to embarrass Tang Ning. Other matters were easy to handle, but there were only two matters that gave Tang Ning a headache. He wanted to reduce the number of students from Jiangnan, and at the same time, he wanted them to be convinced and obedient. How could such a thing be justified in the world? This was like slapping someone in the face, and then asking them to say thank you sincerely. Even the emperor couldn't be so overbearing. He wanted to let the horse run, but he didn't give it grass. Even he knew that if he wanted Tang Ning to do these things, he had to give him a daughter first. The students from Jiangnan were not fools. This matter was fundamentally contradictory. The affairs of the gentry and dignitaries in Beijing were not easy to resolve. The tax reform affected their fundamental interests. Without a few years or even more than 10 years of slow infiltration, it would be impossible to achieve a peaceful evolution. He wanted Tang Ning to facilitate this matter in a short period of time, and it was also to make things difficult for him. Tang Ning never thought that these two troubles would come around and come back to him. But this time, he couldn't refuse these troubles at all. It is easier to solve the problems of Jiangnan students and gentry than to talk to Emperor Chen about his and Zhao Man's affairs. In the imperial study just now, Emperor Chen's meaning has been made very clear. Solve the riots of Jiangnan students, solve the dissatisfaction of gentry, solve the trade between Chen state and grassland, solve the affairs of the Shangshu province, and he and Zhao Man's affairs can be forgiven in the past and in the future. Of course, the premise is that their feelings must be underground and cannot be made public, let alone two people become three people, which will make the royal family lose face. This is Emperor Chen's bottom line and cannot be touched. Zhao Man should be very happy to hear this news. Although they still cannot show their affection in front of others, with Emperor Chen's tacit consent, they don't have to worry anymore. Tang Ning didn't walk a few steps before he met King Huai, who was waiting in front. King Huai handed him a few thick books in his hand and said, "My father asked me to hand these over to Lord Tang." Tang Ning took the heavy files with a gloomy face. These files are not only heavy, but also hot. Even Prince Duan can't catch them. Whoever gets them will be unlucky. Prince Huai looked at him and asked in confusion, "Did Lord Tang do something to make my father angry?" Tang Ning pulled the corner of his mouth and said, "How is it possible?" Prince Huai said, "Then why did my father give you these two tasks?" "Because your majesty trusts me. The price of gaining Chen Wang's recognition of his relationship with Zhao Man is to work like a cow and a horse for him in the next period of time." Tang Ning gritted his teeth and said, "I thank your majesty and the previous emperors." Prince Huai was stunned and said in surprise, "What does this have to do with our ancestors?" Tang Ning waved his hand and said tiredly, "Thank you casually." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Wrong Xiao Wrong. Chapter 769. Tang Zhao finally bought several kilograms of apples for 10 cents per kilogram. The hawker said that 10 cents was 10 cents, and he would not give up a penny. No matter how eloquent he was, he would spit and spit, but he would not lose a penny. 10 wen is 10 wen, that's 5 pounds. Tang Zhao handed the apple to Tang Chi and said, "Dad, you go back first, and I'll go shopping later." Tang Chi carried the apple back, while Tang Zhao wandered on the street. First, he found a few old books at a book stall, wandered around to a chess stall, and sat opposite the stall owner with interest. There are people who set up chess stalls in Beijing, and they often play chess with passers-by. The passers-by have to pay 10 cash first. If they can win the stall owner will pay double the 20 cash back. If he loses, the 10 cash will naturally be gone. These people who set up stalls used this place to eat, and their chess skills were naturally superb. Few people could beat them. Over time, no one was willing to play with them. After Tang Zhao sat down, he threw down a piece of broken silver and said, "Let's play 2 rounds." The stall owner let him take the lead, and the two drank a cup of tea in silence. When they settled down again, the stall owner suddenly asked, "Do you believe my master now? He is right about a lot of things, but what's the use of believing in it?" Tang Zhao shook his head and said, "King Duan is as stupid as a pig. He can't help him up. If the pig doesn't obey, what can the master do?" The stall owner asked back, "Prince Duan is a pig, wouldn't it be better for your Tang family? If he is as cunning as Emperor Chen, how will your Tang family be able to defeat him in the future?" "There is still a future, there is no future." Tang Zhao casually placed a chess piece and said, "Even you have said that King Run comes from behind, and King Duankong is not his opponent. He has the Tang family and the Fang family behind him. What does King Duan win? Your master has guessed so many things, why can't he guess this?" The man said, "Who knows who will win until the last moment?" Tang Zhao asked, "Does he still have a chance to turn defeat into victory?" The owner of the chess stall said, "Didn't my master say that King Run will have to wait for at least 5 years? In these 5 years, anything can happen. Your Tang family is so powerful, and it only took 2 years to defeat him with such a failure, why is it impossible for Tang Ning and the Fang family?" Tang Zhao glanced at him and asked, "Do you think the Tang family is still the same Tang family? Although the Tang family has fallen to this point, my master doesn't believe that you don't have any hidden backups." The man shook his head and said, "If the Tang family can't even do this, we won't have to cooperate in the future." Tang Zhao was too lazy to continue the topic with him and asked directly, "Prince Duan will probably be obedient in the future. Has your master told him what to do next?" The man said, "You have to eat 1 bite at a time, and you have to walk step by step. If there is nothing wrong with the Tang family, let's deal with Prince Kong first. This time the court attacks the powerful, it is a good opportunity." Tang Zhao looked at him and asked, "Are you talking about concubine Zhang Xian's Zhang family?" The stall owner nodded and said, "Although King Kong was temporarily defeated, the Zhang family was not affected at all. They are in charge of the Ximen guards and should not be underestimated." Tang Zhao shook his head and said, "Kong Kong has fallen, but the Zhang family has not fallen. How easy is it to overthrow the Zhang family? This time is a good opportunity." The man put down a chess piece and said, "It's not easy to make these powerful people surrender. You can't kill a chicken to scare the monkeys, just show off. It depends on whether your Tang family has the ability to turn the Zhang family into that. Just a chicken." He glanced at Tang Zhao and said, "That's all I'm going to say. Whether you can seize the opportunity or not depends on your Tang family." Tang Zhao looked at him and asked, "How can I find you next time?" The man put away the chessboard and said with a smile, "I will come to you when needed." Tang Chi returned home carrying several kilograms of apples. When passing by Tang Zhao's room, he paused and looked in. Ever since Tang Jing died and he became the young head of the Tang family, his whole person had changed a lot, so much so that Tang Qi sometimes couldn't believe that he was his son. Although he locked himself in his room to study all day long, Tang Qi didn't believe that a person could change so much in a short period of time. Why did his stupid son suddenly become so sharp-eyed and invincible? He pushed Tang Zhao's door, but it was not closed. Tang Qi walked in slowly, moved away, and picked up a book under his feet. He looked up and saw books scattered on the floor, table, bed, and cabinets of his room, all in a mess. If the books in his room were neatly arranged, Tang Qi would be suspicious, but the fact that he threw the books so scattered just meant that he had read them. Not everyone has the patience to read so many books, but this perseverance is far beyond the reach of others. Tang Qi stood there in shock for a long time before he reluctantly persuaded himself to admit that reading can really transform a person. After becoming the head of the young family, Tang Zhao changed his past playboy and finally became enlightened. This is fine, but if he is still as dandy as before, even if the Tang family can rise, they will be defeated by him sooner or later. He opened the book in his hand to see what he usually read. Azao's imperial examination results were not ideal, but after all, he filled a real vacancy in the civil service department. Tang Qi thought he was reading a history book or something, but he didn't expect it. After turning a few pages, he saw several embarrassing descriptions. Tang Qi turned back to the cover and looked at it, only to see the county magistrate's porn history written on it. This turned out to be a book with unsightly erotic content. Tang Qi threw it on the ground and picked up 2 more books. They turned out to be similar to X Futon and XX Heart Sutra. Opening the content, it is indeed full of indescribable content. Tang Zhao opened the door and saw Tang Qi holding a copy of XX Heart Sutra and looking at it in ecstasy. After being stunned for a moment, he smiled and said, "I didn't expect you to be so good at it, Dad. I still have a few treasured picture books here. Do you want to take a look?" When Tang Zai was in a state of panic, the entire capital was also in panic. A pre-promulgated decree by the imperial court overturned the previous tax system, making the wealthy gentry and powerful people feel terrified. Once the court changes the tax from per capita to tax based on land, the extra tax they pay every year will be dozens to hundreds of times more. What is the difference between this and cutting their flesh? For a time, people with interests in this matter quickly gathered together to discuss countermeasures. Some of them contacted the backers of the DPRK and China to inquire about the situation, and some hired ordinary people to oppose the implementation of this law in real names. This time the imperial court did not directly announce changes to the tax law, but instead solicited the opinions of the people before making changes. They only needed to bribe the people and ask them to put notes with objections into the opinion box at the entrance of the palace. It only cost 5 cents at a time. You can buy enough people. Obviously, this measure of the imperial court is to cut off the flesh of the gentry and the powerful, and it is beneficial to the people. However, there are still some people who are willing to sell their consciences for 5 cents, which has attracted a lot of condemnation from honest people, and those who intend to promote the implementation of this law. Insightful people angrily called it the 5-wen party. However, no matter how cheerful the people below were, the imperial court never responded to this matter and seemed to be determined to amend the tax law. This time, the dignitaries and gentry near Jiangxi province who owned a large amount of land but did not have to pay much tax were really panicked. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 770. Zhou Mingli hurried into Tang Ning's study, looked at him, and asked in shock, "How come the issue of Jiangnan's quota of candidates and streamlining of taxes fell on you?" Tang Ning shook her head and said, "I don't know either. He couldn't tell his father-in-law that this was one of the betrothal gifts that Emperor Chen asked him for after he met Emperor Chen's daughter. What should we do? Zhou Mingli said with a worried look on his face, no one can do anything about these two things. Isn't this going to be difficult for you, Your Majesty? It's okay, Tang Ning smiled and said, there will always be a way. For him, there are naturally ways to solve this matter, and there are many of them. The question is how to choose. The quota of Jiangnan candidates can be directly reduced. Anyone who dares to cause trouble in front of the Imperial College will be arrested and thrown into the prison of the Ministry of Punishment. The quota for Jiangnan candidates can be changed, and the qualifications for the 2 Jiangnan prefecture examinations to be independently asked can be cancelled. From now on, the Jiangnan prefecture examination questions will be set separately by the capital, and they will no longer be judged by ranking, but will set up a separate passing line. The number of places given by the Imperial Court remains unchanged, but whether there are enough students to pass the Jiangnan prefecture examination is not something the Imperial Court can decide. Of course, from Tang Ning's point of view, these were the last resort. The task given to him by Emperor Chen was to do things beautifully, not only to reduce the number of places in Jiangnan, but also to prevent Jiangnan students from having any objections. Any violent behavior or unfair policies would inevitably arouse great resistance from them, so he lost the original intention of doing this. Even Tang Ning couldn't think of any good method at the moment. Huang Chen's order to transfer the matter to him obviously ushered in another round of resistance from Jiangnan students. Many Jiangnan officials also complained, bluntly saying that this method was unfair and too unfair to Jiangnan. Some people even pointed the finger at Jiangyi, saying that the imperial court had given preferential treatment to students from Jiangyi, and now it was unreasonable to suppress Jiangnan. There is a big difference in educational resources between the north and the south of Chen State. In terms of the quality of students, Jiangnan ranks first, even the capital is inferior. However, the number of candidates allocated for each imperial examination in the capital is even higher than that of Jiangnan. However, the capital is the capital of the Chen Kingdom, and the upper echelons of the Chen Kingdom gather here. Jiangnan can only endure this unfair treatment, but their patience has a limit, and they cannot tolerate the capital's repeated bullying. This time, all the quotas that were cut from Jiangnan were added to Jiangyi. Who could bear this? So the conflict between the Imperial College and the students from Jiangnan gradually developed into the conflict between Jiangnan and Jiangyi. Naturally, the students and officials in the capital could not let them arrange it, and gradually began to fight back. The stacks of papers from the two sides filled several tables in the Shangshu province. Before going to the Yamen, the Shangshu province did not discuss a countermeasure. Tang Ning left the Shangshu province as usual. When she was about to go home, she saw a person walking out of the Yamen at the back. That place was Zongshu Yamen, and the person who came out was Tang Jing, a native of Zhongshuya. Every injustice has its owner, and every debt has its owner. Although Tang Jing is also a member of the Tang family, he is different from Tang Qi and Tang Hui. Therefore, Tang Ning did not point the finger at him when it came to matters against the Tang family. He is still his Zhongshuren. In Chen State, although Zhongshuren's official position is not high, he can directly participate in state affairs. He is equivalent to the emperor's secretary and has unlimited future. Even though Tang Ning had no grudges against Tang Jing, he didn't want to get too entangled with the Tang family. He took the initiative to slow down his pace and waited until Tang Jing walked out of the palace gate before he walked out slowly. As he walked out of the palace gate, a voice came from the front. The problem in Jiangnan, in the final analysis, is the conflict between Jiangnan and Jiangyi. His Majesty does not want the Jiangnan faction to become dominant, and the Jiangnan faction does not want the Jiangyi faction to become dominant. It is fundamentally unfeasible to reduce Jiangnan to make up for Jiangyi. Tang Jing did not leave, but waited for him outside the palace gate. After saying this, he got into the carriage. After hearing Tang Jing's words, Tang Ning stood there, and a bright light suddenly flashed through her mind. At this moment, rapid footsteps suddenly came from behind, and a eunuch trotted out, breathing heavily, and said, "Master Tang, your Majesty has summoned." Tang Ning entered the royal study, and Emperor Chen didn't even raise his head as he asked, "Have you thought of a solution to the Jiangnan matter?" Tang Ning said honestly, "Not yet." "I will give you 3 more days," Emperor Chen said calmly. "Within 3 days, I will see the plan to reduce the number of candidates in Jiangnan. If there is an official in the court who has different opinions, I will do it in front of everyone." Tang Ning could tell that Huang Chen didn't want to solve the problem, but just wanted to defeat him. However, he still handed over his hand and said, "I obey the order." Emperor Chen glanced at him and said, "Isn't this an embarrassment for me?" Tang Ning said, "Returning to your Majesty does not count." Chen Huang said, "Since you think this is not an embarrassment, then when the matter in Jiangnan is resolved, the matter in Jiangyi will be left to you." Tang Ning raised her head and asked, "Your Majesty, what's going on in Jiangyi?" Chen Huangdao, after the number of sons in Jiangnan is reduced, the power of the Jiangnan faction will definitely be reduced. By then, without the restraint of the Jiangnan faction, the Jiangyi faction will be too strong, which is not conducive to the balance of the court. Tang Ning thought for a while and asked, "How about we find some random reasons and select some officials from the capital to raid their homes? Does your Majesty think this method is feasible?" Chen Huang looked at him and said, "What do you think?" Tang Ning did not answer, but gave Chen Huang a vague glance. He was the one who wanted to weaken the Jiangnan party. He was also the one who thought the Jiangnan party was too weak to suppress the capital. At this moment, Tang Ning really wanted to take off her shoes and slap him in the face with the solace of her shoes. Weakening the Jiangnan faction while asking them to increase their strength to contain the more powerful capital, what is the difference between this and asking him to draw colorful black with a brush? Emperor Chen glanced at him and said, "What, is there a problem?" Tang Ning gritted his teeth and bowed, saying, "Your Majesty, no." After trying to think from the perspective of Emperor Chen, Tang Ning was not angry at all. If he was Emperor Chen, the person standing at this moment would have had at least 3 legs broken by the guards. Emperor Chen waved his hand and said, "If you don't have it, go back. I will only give you 3 days. If you still haven't figured out a solution after 3 days, remember to wear 2 more pairs of pants when you go to court." After Tang Ning left, Emperor Chen put down the memorial, slowly stood up, took a long breath, and murmured, "After thinking about it, I feel bad if I don't beat him." Emperor Chen wanted to beat him by deliberately making things difficult, which was simply a foolish dream. Even if he really wanted Tang Ning to paint a colorful black, Tang Ning would be able to meet his request and leave him speechless. On the second morning, during the morning court session, Tang Ning held his tablet and said, "Your Majesty, regarding the allocation of candidates' quotas in each state, I have a memorial." "So soon?" Emperor Chen looked at him in surprise and said, "Tell me about it." Tang Ning bowed and said, "For a long time, the quotas for candidates in the imperial examinations in our dynasty have been occupied by the 2 provinces of Jiangnan and Jingji. More than 70%, I think this is extremely unfair to the students in other provinces. I propose that Jingji and Jiangnan each give up 20% of their quotas and divide them equally among Tuji, Shannan, Huainan, Hedong, Guanyi, etc., so that it will be fair." Emperor Chen wanted to reduce the power of Jiangnan, but he didn't want Jingji to become too powerful. In this case, he would give each of them 30 strokes of the cane, and at the same time reduce the quotas of candidates in the 2 places and divide them equally among the other provinces. Wouldn't that be exactly what Emperor Chen wanted? When Tang Ning finished speaking, the whole court was in an uproar. The quota of candidates cut by Jiangnan Dao was originally given to Jingji Dao. In this way, Jiangnan's influence in the court would gradually decrease, and Jingji's power would continue to expand. No one expected that Tang Ning would not only not give Jiangnan's quota of candidates to Jingji, but also cut the quota of Jiangnan and Jingji at the same time and divide them equally among the other daos. In this way, in the future court, the power of the Jiangnan and Jingji parties will gradually decrease, and the other daos will gradually rise, breaking the situation where the officials of the two parties monopolize power. In this way, more benefits can be obtained for the daos, and they no longer have to follow Jiangnan and Jingji to eat their leftovers. The court was in an uproar for a moment, and then it became quiet again. However, the expressions of the crowd changed unprecedentedly. The expressions of the officials in the two Jiangnan dao were stunned. Although Jiangnan still had its quota reduced, the capital did not take advantage, but suffered the same loss as them. Thinking about it this way, things didn't seem so bad. The officials who represented the interests of the capital were caught in an unprovoked disaster. They were naturally angry and dissatisfied. However, just as they were about to stand up and refute Tang Ning's proposal, they caught a glimpse of the eyes of the other officials. They couldn't help but feel a pang in their hearts and stopped their steps. In the court, except for the officials from Jiangnan and the capital, the other officials all showed joy on their faces, with strange lights flashing in their eyes, like cats smelling blood. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 771. Chen Guo selected officials through the imperial examination, and 9 out of 10 officials were selected through the imperial examination. Although this method of selecting officials prevents officials from being monopolized by wealthy families and thus indirectly controlling the court, it will also expose some other problems over time. For example, the educational resources in Jiangyi and Jiangnan are far superior to those in other areas, and the quantity and quality of students are also higher. Half of the officials in the DPRK and the central government are from Jiangyi and Jiangnan. Recruiting officials based on their talents may seem fair, but it is actually unfair. Officials born in the south of the Yangtze River are naturally oriented to the south of the Yangtze River and were once students of the Jiangyi province. Their first thought must be to benefit the Jiangyi province. In the DPRK, they were divided by region and formed various parties. Although there were many differences within the parties, they related to when it comes to issues related to the interests of the place of residence, they will be consistent with the outside world. This resulted in the capital and Jiangnan occupying most of the imperial court's resources. The rest of the Taoists had few officials in Beijing, and they were inconspicuous. They were suppressed by Jiangnan's capital. If others ate meat, whether they could drink soup depended on the mood of the other party. The root cause of this problem is simply that compared with Jiangnan in Jiangyi province, there are not many places for candidates to be elected, and naturally there are fewer jinshi. No one speaks in the court, and there is no corresponding benefit. Once this situation changes, as proposed by Marquis Dingguo, Jiangnan and the capital each give up 20% of their quotas to them. Although the status of the Taoists in the court cannot be said to be completely reversed, it will always improve. This is almost a free bargain. Who would be stupid enough to refuse? What Marquis Dingguo said makes sense. Master Tang's proposal is very good. I second the proposal. I also second the proposal. For a time, all the officials from the DPRK and China who were born outside the capital and Jiangnan came forward to second the proposal. This was for the benefit of all of them. How could the Marquis of Dingguo stand up and face the officials from Jiangnan and the capital? Officials representing Jiangnan's interests wanted to refute, but when they saw such a confrontation, they also kept their mouths shut. His Majesty is obviously determined to weaken Jiangnan's influence in the court. They are making such a fuss just to gain more benefits, which cannot change the final outcome. Now Tang Ning has only reduced their quota by 20%, and has not added it to the capital. Instead, it has also cut the capital by 20%. This result is not unacceptable to Jiangnan. Tang Ning looked calm. Although he had not communicated with anyone beforehand, He had expected that so many officials would stand up to support him before he made the proposal. Although Jiangnan and Jiangyi are very powerful in the government, no one can compare with them, but when all the Taoists unite, the two factions must avoid their sharp edges. This matter was originally beneficial to them, and it was a free bargain. These people should know how to do it. The figure of 20% was something he had considered for a long time. It would not harm the foundation of Jiangnan and Jiangxing province, satisfy Emperor Chen, and also make other Taoists tempted. If it was higher than this number, Jiangnan and Jiangyi might be able to compete with him. Damn it, if there is less, Chen Huang will definitely feel that it is not enough. Emperor Chen glanced at Tang Ning, looked down, and asked, "Does anyone have any objections to Marquis Dingguo's proposal?" No one in Jiangnan spoke, and the officials representing the Jiangyi region were naturally dissatisfied with this proposal. This matter had nothing to do with them in the first place, and the Jiangyi region had simply suffered an unreasonable disaster. An official stood up and raised his hand to speak. Tang Ning looked at him and asked with a smile, "Zhang Shuling has any objection to my proposal?" Zhang Shuling looked at his kind smile, his heart skipped a beat, and he suddenly realized something. "Your Majesty has left this matter to Tang Ning. If he can't handle it well, wouldn't it be dereliction of duty? If Tang Ning is punished for dereliction of duty because of him, he will definitely blame himself. Zhang Shuling does not think that his background is deeper than that of the Tang family, and his official position is higher than that of Prime Minister Feng." He looked back at his colleagues in the capital and saw that they all lowered their heads and did not dare to stand up. He was secretly angry in his heart. When he raised his head, a smile appeared on his face and he said, "The Marquis Dingguo has misunderstood. The Marquis proposal is reasonable, there is evidence, and I think it makes sense." He turned towards Emperor Chen, bowed and said, "Your Majesty, I agree with Marquis Dingguo's proposal. I second the proposal." Seconded. Zhang Shuling took the lead, and officials from Jiangyi and Jiangnan also stood up and expressed their agreement. The 20% figure was not enough for them to risk offending Tang Ning and various officials in the DPRK. "If that's the case, then let's do it." Emperor Chen glanced at Tang Ning, with a look of pity in his eyes, and said, "If nothing happens, just retreat from the court." The situation in the court today was as Tang Ning had expected. Jiangyi and Jiangnan had indeed taken up too much of the court's resources, making Emperor Chen dissatisfied. However, as officials from these two places, they would not feel that what they received was enough. The words he asked Zhang Shuling in the court just now actually had a hint of threat in them. Unexpectedly, one day he would use his power to dominate others and become a powerful official in others' mouths. "Thank you, Mr. Tang." Marquis Dingguo spoke uprightly. "On behalf of the students from Henan province, I would like to thank Lord Marquis for his great kindness. Master Tang's kindness will be remembered by me, the Taoist official in Guan'ei." The lower official represents Huainan Road. After leaving the hall, many officials who had never spoken to each other before clasped their fists and bowed to Tang Ning, thanking her. Tang Ning returned the greeting one by one. Seeing someone walking out of the hall, Tang Ning smiled and asked, "This incident has caused Jiangyi province to suffer a loss. Zhang Shuling won't hold grudges against me, right?" Zhang Shuling said quickly, "Don't dare, don't dare. Don't you dare." "No, no, no." Zhang Shuling quickly changed his words and said, "Master Tang is also dedicated to serving the public. How could I bear grudge against you? Master Tang, please don't think so. You really don't hold grudges." "I really don't hold grudges," Zhang Shuling said quickly. "However, Mr. Tang has caused Jiangnan to suffer losses this time, and Zhang Shizhong may be dissatisfied." "Don't talk nonsense." Zhang Shizhong came from behind and said, "Prince Duan wants to reduce my Jiangnan quota by 30%. Mr. Tang helped us reduce it to 20%. It's too late for me to thank Mr. Tang." How can I be dissatisfied? Don't provoke me estrangement. Isn't cutting it by 20% a cut? Master Tang, you see, Zhang Shuling is still unhappy. When Zhang Shuling and the attendants were arguing, a eunuch ran over and said, Master Tang, your majesty has summoned you to the imperial study room. Watching Tang Ning leave, Zhang Shuling and the waiter breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. No one wants to offend His Majesty's most valued favorite, and in this matter, he represents His Majesty's wishes, and it is indeed not for himself. If the trouble comes to the end, they will be the ones who cannot end it. He tied all the state capitals except the capital and Jiangnan to his ship, putting Jiangnan and the capital in a dilemma. They had to successfully complete the task assigned by His Majesty. Tang Ning was still the same Tang Ning. Zhang Shuling sighed and said, "Hi, really hi." In the imperial study, Emperor Chen paced and murmured, "Wonderful," reducing the number of candidates in Jiangnan, and at the same time reducing the capital to block Jiangnan's mouth, and using other channels to constrain the capital, weakening the parties in Jiangnan and the capital, and allowed the two parties to continue to check and balance, and also gain the hearts and minds of other people, killing 3 birds with 1 stone, killing 3 eagles with 1 stone. Why didn't I think of this? Wei Jian smiled and said, "With such a smart minister, why does your majesty need to think about it?" Although he did this matter very beautifully. Chen Huang stroked the short beard on his chin and said, "But if I don't slap him, I still feel uncomfortable." Not long after, Tang Ning walked into the royal study, bowed and said, "See your majesty. You did a great job in this matter." Chen Huang sat in his seat, looked up at him, and asked, "I entrust you with such an arduous task. Do you feel any resentment towards me in your heart?" Tang Ning shook her head and said, "It is the duty of a minister to feed the emperor's salary and share his worries." Huang Chen waved his hand with a smile and said, "This matter is indeed a bit difficult. It is normal for you to have resentment. This is human nature. I don't blame you." Tang Ning said, "I really have no resentment." Chen Huang was confused, "Really?" Tang Ning said solemnly, "Really not." He glanced at Chen Huang. This routine was too cliched and childish. Who doesn't know how to enforce the law when fishing? I'm afraid that if he even slightly nods his head and says the word yes, he will be dragged out and beaten 30 times again. He, Tang Ning, has never encountered such a situation. How could he fall for such a trivial skill? Very good. He fulfills his duties and has no complaints. This is my good minister. Emperor Chen stood up, walked down, looked at him with relief, and asked, "By the way, when you entered the imperial study just now, who took the first step?" "Only 1 foot."